Good morning and welcome to Around the World with Dane Waters. I'm your host, Dane Waters. I'm broadcasting here today from London, United Kingdom. Listen, as we talk about every week, what's going on around the world. Let's take just a couple of quick seconds and talk about that before we get into our topic. There's, once again, things happening all over the world. We look at what's happening in the United States with President-elect Donald Trump choosing his cabinet. Listen, no matter how I feel about Donald Trump, I have to say that his picks will definitely shake up the U.S. government and shake up foreign policy. We'll have to see how that happens. But I think that after January 20th, one thing that we'll see, and we'll have a show on this, is just who his nominees are, the Senate confirmation process. And one thing that I always find interesting is that in the United Kingdom, when they have an election, really within 24 hours, the old prime minister out, the new prime minister's in, and the whole cabinet is there. Well, in the U.S., it doesn't work that way. Every major cabinet position has to have Senate confirmation, and that's going to be a battle itself. But it will actually give us a good indication of where America is going from a foreign policy standpoint. We'll just have to see. In addition to that, news of that President Joe Biden just pardoned his son Hunter. That's big news in the United States. Quite interesting, from a presidential standpoint. He always said that he would never pardon his son. But I have to say, as a father, and you're president of the United States, a father has to do what's best for his son. So we'll have to see where that turns out. Around the world, we have the conflict in the Middle East, which is once again escalating. There's supposedly a ceasefire there. But whether you want to believe Hezbollah or Israel, they're going back and forth with a new conflict, which is growing. We'll have to see. But that takes us into, one of the big issues there, of course, is what's going on in Gaza, Hamas, and with the 127 prisoner wars that are still there. And one thing that we like to do on the show, that we want to do on the show, is that we want to talk about the human side of conflict. I mean, we always we know about the missiles going over, we talk about the drones, we all see every day what's happening in Ukraine, between Ukraine and Russia. But the human toll is something that we should talk about so people understand it's not just, technical stuff. It's not just missiles. It's not just, tanks. It's humans that are caught up in this conflict. And we should focus more on that, which we're going to do. Just after the break, we have an amazing guest with us today, Maksym Butkevych, if I can say the last name correctly. And I'm never good with names. I can't even say my own last name. Today, we're honored to have with us Maksym Butkevych. Maksym, thanks for being with us today.
Thank you for inviting me. Yep.
Maksym is if I get this right, is a human rights activist, a journalist, and a former prisoner of war during the Ukraine conflict. And so today we're going to talk as much about it as you want to talk about it, because the goal is just to have the world understand that humans like you are really what the war is all about. So tell us about yourself. Tell us about your experience, and let's go from there.
Thank you, Dane, for inviting me, and thanks to everyone who are with us here today. Yes, I was called, I am still called human rights defender. I'm saying called because it's really an honorable thing, an honorable title to be called for me personally. But I dedicated many years of my life trying to defend and protect rights and freedoms of my compatriots and other peoples from around the world. My main areas of preoccupation in this activity were protecting, defending, aiding refugees and asylum seekers who try to find asylum in Ukraine, and since 2014 assisting internally displaced persons. And also one can't deal with issues of asylum and refugees and without coming across issues of discrimination and racism and xenophobia. So I had also, with my colleagues, to get involved into monitoring and counteracting to manifestations of xenophobia. Before that, and partly during that activity, I worked as an international news journalist for Ukrainian television, different TV channels, changing them, and I also worked for BBC World Service for the Ukrainian section. and was honored to be one of the co-founders of Hromadske Radio, which is independent, non-profit, but one of the biggest radios currently in Ukraine. And to cut the long story short, on 24th of February 2022, when the first rockets started to fall onto Kiev, my native city, and Russian invaders poured into Ukrainian territory. That was a moment we were expecting to an extent, but we still couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe that, now in this area, in this part of the world, someone would be that insane to launch a full-scale war. Obviously, at the time, it was obviously into an incredible amount of tragedies, human tragedies, but it happened. And apparently, the battle raged on the outskirts of Kiev already. And I know situation with, well, even if we talk only about human rights, my main thing in my life, it's not work, it's more than work. I can't work with human rights, 9 to 5, and the rest of the day say, oh, okay, I'm living human rights today in my office. It doesn't work like that for me. And I know situation with human rights in Russia. I was dealing with refugees from Russia, among other countries of origin. And my colleagues and friends, human rights defenders in Russia, of course, were in touch with me. So basically, Russian political leadership eliminated what remained from human rights defense. Subsequently, 1 year after another, until human rights became just another phrase from the Russian constitution, which is not observed anyway. And I understood very well that if Ukraine falls, if Kiev falls, part of Ukraine falls, I never thought Ukraine will lose. But if Russians will take over, there will be no human rights defense because there will be no human rights. There will be, but they will be breached on an everyday basis, especially in the newly occupied territories. All things we managed to achieve, me and my colleagues in Ukraine, fighting for human rights and enlarging the space of freedom for many people here, and we achieved something. There is much more to do still, of course, a lot of work, but that all would be erased. Until invaders are defeated, that would be very difficult to even start to restore. So that was one of the reasons, maybe main reason for me to realize that if I want really to defend human rights, if I'm a human rights defender, unfortunately, we were forced into a position where in order to defend human rights, I had to sign up to join the army and to take up arms to defend human rights. I'm not a military person by my vision of the world. I am actually anti-militarist. Rather, I don't think militarization of society leads to, it's okay, it's a separate issue, but I'm anti-militarist. But as such, I felt that I have to go and join the army. And on 24th of February, I went to the sign-up office. And on 4th of March, I was called up and I became an officer of Ukrainian armed forces. This is how it happened, and me and my platoon, we took part in liberation of Kiev region, several towns and villages. Then there was a pause, and in mid-June 2022, we moved east, received an order to reinforce our units there. And on 21st of June 2022, unfortunately, me and 8 of my guys, we found ourselves surrounded and in a position where we could not actually defend anything. We were lured into a trap, which was newly formed Russian positions, and we were taking POWs. And as a POW, I spent next 2 years and 4 months. But there was one difference which took place within several months of captivity. As bad as it was, and it was pretty bad. I mean, if you have an idea of being POW, which you draw from Geneva Conventions, when we talk about Russians, just forget about it. There are no Geneva Conventions in place, or rather, they are breached on everyday basis when it comes to that. But to make things worse, in August 2022, they decided to fabricate a number of criminal cases against Ukrainian prisoners of war to accuse them of being war criminals and to sentence them to long prison camp sentences, and I was one of them. I was accused of shooting at civilians at the beginning of June in the city of Severodonetsk, where I've never been during war, neither my platoon. And on 4th of June, I was in Kiev, and the whole case was actually very poorly fabricated, but it doesn't matter because there was no court. Well, I mean, there was court, but, this was a kangaroo court. The whole verdict was pre-written. And I had to sign confessions under duress, as they say. Well, we talk about torture, and we talk about threats of torture and threats to life. And I was sentenced to 13 years in a prison colony of strict regime. And very soon I met several dozens of other Ukrainian prisoners of war who are in the very same scenario, where sentenced by fabricating cases against them to long-term penal colony sentences. And the rest of my time I spent in the colony, with a short break for another court session, when fortunately, suddenly, unexpectedly to me, on 17th of October 2024, me and my brother-in-arms, another prisoner of war convicted on fabricated charges, we were shipped out of the colony. We were not told where we are going. We were just told that to another place. We assumed it will be another colony, maybe in Russian proper, not in occupied territory as we were before. And on 18th of October, after a very tough journey with no water or food for more than a day, in very uncomfortable, stressed position, suddenly we found ourselves really going to prisoners' swap. On 18th of October, we were exchanged and came back to Ukraine. And since then, I lived through one of the happiest periods in my life, I should say. It's almost tangible what it feels like to be free. And, philosophers talk a lot about, or used to talk a lot about, whether human freedom exists. Now I'm just saying, it's not a matter of discussion to me. One should find him or herself in a situation where freedom is almost non-existent. I'm saying almost because while we're human beings, we always have freedom, at least some bit of it inside us. But then to be liberated, and the difference is so essential. I really believe that to be free is an essence of human being, but also it's a happiness, and this happiness I'm living through now. The only thing is I'm not absolutely happy because my country is at war, and because my guys and my brothers in arms and sisters in arms in thousands are still held in Russian captivity. Otherwise, I'm really happy.
I'll ask you straightforward. Do you believe that the Russians, especially Vladimir Putin, should be held accountable and be prosecuted for war crimes?
I firmly believe so. I really think that what has been done by Russian political leadership and Russian state machinery, and what it is done by them right now, what is done by them, is something which should not be omitted or forgotten if we don't bring those responsible for that to justice. That means that basically everything is allowed in the world, and one can treat humans as objects and turn them into slaves as we were turned. What really bothers me a little bit when it comes to POWs, so Ukrainian ones, especially those convicted on fabricated charges, apart from the absurdity of this thing by itself. I think we were seen as just part of the war. Where there is war, there are prisoners of war. But we were not. We were not. We were goods to be traded. We were specifically, I think, understand it, sentenced on trump-up charges because each and every one of us had price tag on our head, and we had to be swapped, exchanged for other people, for goods, for resources, for some political decisions maybe. And this is a proper slave trade, and this is a hostage taking. It's not only about what is done on the battlefield, which is horrendous, but also about what is done on the occupied territories to civilians who are also taken prisoners, hostages, in thousands. About children, Ukrainian children from occupied territories being deported forcibly to Russia, and then it's done under the slogan of new Russian authorities, new for the occupied territories, meaning saving them from horrors of war, the war launched by these very authorities, where they call liberation of towns and villages, mopping them up from the face of earth. Basically, this is how they liberated Bakhmut, this is how they liberated many other places. So all these rivers of blood and seas of tears and this horrible tragedies in millions brought by Russian political leadership into Ukraine, they should be held responsible for that. But what is probably even more important for me, Russian leadership, they are dismantling consciously on purpose what's remained of international humanitarian law. They really dismantle what's remained of, as weak as it looked, international security system set up after the Second World War and in next decades. Basically, what they're doing by ignoring Geneva Conventions and other, specifically international human rights instruments, turning the United Nations into a joke, and international humanitarian law as such, turning it into a bad joke. They are constructing a different world where might makes right, where pacta sunt servanda, the agreements should be observed. Main principle of law means nothing, where agreements themselves cost less than the paper they are signed on. And where human beings are not treated as being born free and equal in their dignity and rights. No, it is not the world which Russian leadership brings. It's just the opposite. They bring this totally different vision of the way people should live. And this is what Pax Russica, Ruski Mir is about. So it's about values also. It's about our fundamentals. I truly believe so. We want to live with. And if I want to live in, I set a goal to try to make closer the world where people can live without fear. This is exactly the opposite from what Russian leadership is trying to achieve. And this is why it's not only about Ukraine, and this is why it's not only Ukrainian fight. I really believe that all people who treasure freedom and solidarity and dignity, human choice, but also responsibility, they all should understand that Ukraine is now fighting war for like all freedom-loving people, and this is why it is important for many other countries and many other peoples. But I'm afraid we cannot do it alone. We fight, and we will fight tooth and nail for that, because this is extremely important for us. These are our fundamentals, but resources are too incomparable. So yes, I believe Ukraine should be supported, but I believe that at the end of the day, Vladimir Putin is a war criminal, and his aides and his accomplices, including also media professionals who launched and still carry on this extremely it's the biggest propaganda machine I've ever seen in my life, what I witnessed while in captivity, actually. But they really made this war possible. So yes, I believe they should be prosecuted for war crimes and crimes against humanity. And also, I actually think that attempt of genocide of Ukrainian people.
Well, listen, I 100% agree with you. I think that this is what the world needs to understand, that this is more than just, as I said earlier, just missiles being lobbed back and forth. This is about human beings and the fundamentals of everything from territorial integrity to human rights. I mean, if we allow Russia to win this war, where does it stop? I mean, we see what's happening in Georgia now. I mean, who says that Russia won't invade Georgia? You see what's happening in Syria. You see what's happening. I mean, Russians have, and the Russian leadership have historically not been on the side of human rights, as you say. And this is why it's critical that Americans and the rest of the world, whether they're Africans, they're Americans, they're Europeans, understand that what Ukrainians are doing, they're fighting for us. They're fighting for human rights, all human rights, not just individuals. And it's critical that the world understand that. So how are you doing now after, being, we only have a couple more minutes here, but how are you dealing post being released? Are you, is there a big support community? Is the Ukrainian people being very supportive, or what's going on with you personally?
After release, I underwent rehabilitation in one of the rehabilitation centers for Ukrainian armed forces. I've been there for 4 weeks, and with every next day now, I understand how important this period of time was. We were really looked after and supported by medical professionals and psychologists. It was really nice work. And now I'm for 2 weeks in my native city, capital of Ukraine, Kiev. It's still a bit unusual, I've missed 2 years and 4 months. On the 2 years and a half, we have to take up also some time which I spent on the front line. But it's really nice to be here. What really bothers me when it comes to rehabilitation, the institution we've been to is really nice. And there are several other places like that one I attended. But I understand that the scale of the problem is so vast that we need to develop the countrywide system of medical and psychological support and rehabilitation, not only for prisoners, which we really hope will be swapped or released otherwise soon in big numbers. And we are talking about thousands and thousands of POWs and more civilian prisoners, but also for our boys and girls who will be back from the front line. They will have a need to be supported and cared after, and I really hope that I will contribute to an extent possible. I'll find out, I think, soon how it is possible. Contribute to establishment of the countrywide system of care and support post-traumatic, post-battlefield, or post-captivity. Otherwise, we'll have thousands of our compatriots, brothers and sisters in arms, having really important and sometimes bad issues when it comes to their health, and our community as such will be under risk when it comes to that. So yes, I'm still on my leave. I'm still an officer of Ukrainian Armed Forces. I'm still on my leave. 2 weeks remaining, and I have several choices to make in my life. what to do next. I know my goals, and one of them, the first of them, I really would like to contribute to release of all those who still stay in Russia in captivity behind bars. This is the only way probably I can thank all of those wonderful people who were involved in my release and campaign of solidarity with me. And now I'm trying to figure out, after missing 2 years, more than 2 years, what are the most efficient tools available to contribute to that. I still have time, but I have choices to make.
Well, that's where we met. We met in just after you had been released in the rehabilitation hospital there. And what was impressed me as I traveled around Ukraine and was at that facility is how, like even the colonel who was in charge of that facility, how resourceful they are in trying to find the support necessary to provide the aid. Ukraine and the Ukrainian government, they don't have unlimited funds. They don't have everything that they need. And what's inspiring to me as an individual is what individuals from whether it's the colonel or whether it's Julia, who we both know, and individuals like that who have done so much to support people like you. But I implore the rest of the world that Ukraine, they need help, they need support, they need the ability and the funding necessary to support, the POWs that come home. Because by every estimation, there's what, how many prisoners of war do you think there are out there that have to come back and be reintegrated? What's the number you believe?
Estimates vary, and frankly, I have quite bad memory for numbers, which even worse it in captivity. But I believe that I've heard about something between 7,000 and 12,000 when it comes to prisoners of war. But we talk about up to 20,000 civilian inmates, civilian captives who are also held mostly arbitrary and without any sentence or accusation. So we talk about really big number, like more than put together maybe 30,000 people.
Yeah, and all these individuals got to be rehabilitated and put back into society. Listen, sadly, we run out of time. It's a great honor to have you on the show. I look forward to seeing you either in Ukraine or in the UK whenever you're here. But listen, I applaud everything you're doing. We are totally supportive of you, and we look forward to being in touch in the future. So thanks a lot. And thanks everyone for being here for Around the World with Dane Waters, and we'll see you next week.